Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Alfano. I'm the founder of Plant Powered Consulting, where I help brands navigate the plant-based landscape. And I'm also the host of the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm thrilled to be here with you today to talk about investing in alternative proteins. We're also going to talk about the general investing landscape in the plant-based sector. So much to discuss today, so let's get into it. I'm going to share my screen, and you should soon be able to see my presentation, which I will put on slideshow mode. Okay, so there you see it. Just give me a second while I hit all the right buttons. And here we go. Okay, from the beginning. As I said, today we're talking about investing in alternative proteins. I'm Elizabeth Alfano. You're probably going to have questions all the way through. If you do, write them down. It's 3 a.m. my time, so I can't be with you live. But if you do have questions for me later, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can find me at elizabeth@elizabethalfano.com. Okay, so the global food supply system is worth $8 trillion annually. If you want to break that out just into meat, the global meat sector is worth $1.4 trillion. But it's shifting to plant-based eating and plant-based innovation. We're going to talk all about that. But first, let's look at the general plant-based landscape. So 36% of the U.S. market considers themselves flexitarians. What's a flexitarian? Someone who is working out the meat and dairy. They still eat it, of course, but they're trying to work in more vegetables. Probably they've heard from their doctor for about a decade, if not more, that they should be working out meat for their health. Somewhere along the lines, they've seen, I'm sure, a factory farm video. They're thinking about their health, the planet. They're listening to millennials, and they're starting to get the memo. So more than a third of the U.S. population considers themselves as flexitarian, working out the meat and dairy. Again, in the U.S., we will be talking globally here after this slide, but again, here in the U.S., plant-based food sales are up 43% in the last 2 years, growing 9 times faster than the total food sales. Indeed, the Boston Consulting Group agrees. They're looking at the alt protein market, and they say by 2035, so that's 14 years, really not very long, almost in the blink of an eye, that the alternative protein market is going to $290 billion. Just to give you a little reference, we said that the global meat market is $1.4 trillion, and the plant-based meat market in the U.S. is about $1.4 billion. So, and it's 4.2 globally for plant-based meat. So we're seeing quite a jump to 2090 billion in alt protein. So all of the alternative proteins together, not just meat and not just plant-based either. We'll talk about that by 2035. So why are we having these incredible jumps? Well, it's because alt protein companies innovate to solve some of the world's most pressing problems. Probably you know about them, but let's hit on them briefly here. Animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. So when you look at not just the growing of animals, but also transportation and cutting down trees, those trees which do pull carbon from the air, they're not doing that anymore because the trees have been cut so that they can grow grains. These grains have fiber and they have protein. Are we feeding them to people? No, we're feeding them to animals. That's another conversation. But again, you're missing that carbon benefit from the trees. You also have all the transportation. Meat is heavy, et cetera. We ship meat around the world from Australia to the Middle East, things that make no sense in the sense that they're not efficient. And markets like efficiency. Markets reward efficiency. That's why you're going to see the growth that you're going to see. Also, animal proteins, you've heard this from your doctor probably as well. Animal proteins have a negative effect on human health. So they're the leading cause of diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease taking away more people than Corona did, than terrorism does, et cetera. So, this is a global problem. And I don't need to tell you this. We're all adults in the room. We've seen some kind of video at some point in our life. This is a very tame picture. It's not really even depicting what animal agriculture is, and it's unkind and unnatural. And that's being very tame about it. It's also related to pandemics. So this mass incarceration of animals living sort of nose to butt, right on top of each other. It makes it very easy for these things to spread, not just coronavirus, but also African swine fever that is in China, and Asian bird flu, and mad cow disease, and Ebola, and things like this. So pandemics are on the top of everyone's mind, millennials included. So we see that 79% of millennials and Gen Z eat plant-based meat. Doesn't mean they only eat plant-based meat, but they are open to plant-based meat. They eat it. Some of them do it for their health, but really they're younger, so it's not so much their health that's top of mind, but they're looking for companies that are transparent on their labels, on their carbon footprint. They're looking for better animal welfare, less chemicals in the water supply, all these things that millennials care about for the benefit of the planet. They are a large buying block. They have a lot of purchasing power. And when you're looking at statistics like 79%, it adds up and means something. But as much as I love millennials and Gen Z, that's not going to do it alone. And certainly it's not vegans and vegetarians. To be clear, that's a very small percent of the market. Vegans, about 3% of the global market, and flexitarians, depending on the study, about 11%. So that's a very small portion. But of course that with flexitarians makes a much larger portion, but that's not the only factor here. It's also businesses that are looking at their bottom line and saying, this is an inefficient system. We need to get better returns for what we're doing. So according to the World Resources Institute, it takes 9 calories of grain to feed a chicken to get 1 calorie back. What business person says, I'll give you 90 cents so that you can give me a dime back? It's not an equation anybody wants, particularly as we scale up or have a growing population. The resources that we have on land are going to be more and more scarce, such as the land it takes not just to grow the animals, but as we discussed before, we cut down trees and we grow grains. Do we give those grains to people, those grains that have fiber and protein? No, we're giving them to animals, but animals need water. They need time. Do we have meat yet? No, we have to cut down more trees, grow more grains, which we still don't give to people, even though we have food shortages. We give them to animals. So very inefficient, also leading cause in greenhouse gas emissions, and then, of course, time. So as I alluded to before, according to the UN, we're going from 7.7 billion people on the planet to 9.7 billion people on the planet. But we're not getting more land and we're not getting more water. So you can see the business need to be more efficient with what we have, and the growing cost of land and water is going to throw that business equation into havoc. So you can see that businesses thinking long term are going to want better returns and a better use of their resources. So, okay, we've talked about the consumer and we've talked about the producers, but what are investors doing about it? Well, they're pretty happy. They're getting in big because they see, as we discussed in the beginning, they see a shift of the entire food supply system. So lots of opportunity to make money there. In 2020, the plant-based alternative protein sector saw more investment than all of 2010 to 2019 combined. I just love this slide. It comes from the Good Food Institute. So let's take a minute here, everybody. Get up close to your screen. So what are we looking at here? If you were to add 2010 all the way up to 2019, you'd get $3 billion of investment. I know we talked about the global food supply system. This is still a very small number, but the important thing is to see the growth that happened in 2020. In 2020, we see $3.1 billion, more than all of 2010 to 2019 together. And we see that fermentation, this yellow segment here in your slide, that's why I said, everybody get up close and personal. You can see that fermentation, we're going to talk about that in a second, sector growing. You can see the deal count growing. So the line on the top will tell you that in 2020, there were 170 different deals that closed. This bar on 2020, so it's unfortunate the colors are quite similar, but the lower green color, I'll call it like a teal green, is plant-based, and that's $2.2 billion of investment. The yellow is fermentation, that's just shy of 600 million, and the dark green is cultivated meat, cellular meat as it's also known, and that is about 377 million. We're going to get into that. So let's look at those opportunities. I think before we get into fermented and cultivated, we probably know what plant-based meat and dairy is, but I'll just go over it. So that would be your Beyond Meat burger, your Impossible burgers, Oatly. These are products that are derived from plants, and it's usually grains and pea proteins and other things. We'll talk about alternative proteins, but those are products coming directly from plants. Okay, but there's a new player in town. There's an alt protein opportunity emerging. It's fermented proteins, and it's taking about 19% of the capital. So fermented proteins, just in case you don't know, another great slide. Look at this from the Good Food Institute. But just a minute here to talk about fermented proteins. So you've probably had kombucha or kimchi, or, we do a lot of fermenting of products already. It's an age-old process. But here we have, for fermenting proteins, two types of fermentations. We have precision fermentation. This is a gross oversimplification, but if you've ever been lucky enough to get your hands on Perfect Day ice cream, what they do is they take genes, not even genes from an animal. There's so many scientific databases with the genes of animals already in these databases. They take genes from the database, and for lack of a better expression, they sort of map it out onto a microbe that understands what it is and can go ahead and grow it. So they take the genes that are the animal proteins, casein and whey. They map it onto a microbe that understands that equation, if you will, for casein and whey, and then given the sugar to grow and feed itself, it grows the proteins from animals with no animals. And why that's wonderful for animal suffering, of course, it's also great because you didn't have to spend the time with those animals. You didn't have to give them land. You didn't have to give them water. You didn't have to give them grains. You didn't have to cut down trees. It's very, very efficient. Okay. There's also biomass fermentation, which is many microbes at a time growing at great scale to produce whole cuts of meat, for example. So these types of investments are what I'm talking about here, almost $600 million. You can see the deal count is just under 30. And I anticipate that this sector of the market is going to grow extremely fast because we already know how to do it. Really, the technology is not that hard. It's not that difficult to scale up. We'll talk about some of the blockages in the alt protein sector, and one of them really is scaling up, and fermentation doesn't have that problem. So a very interesting sector to watch. And I'll talk about some of the companies in this sector in a minute. But we also have cellular agriculture, also known as cultivated meat. So we'll see on the next chart. Of course, it's coming from the Good Food Institute. But we already have in 2021 more investment than all of 2020 that happened in cultivated meat. So last year, 2020, we saw $366 million. You see on this chart from the Good Food Institute. And you see the deal count here is higher, about 50 deals. So very exciting to watch this grow. Okay, here's just a fun chart to graph to show you how the landscape has increased, how many more companies are coming to the fold. And we'll talk about this a little bit later too, but sometimes when people think of alternative proteins, they immediately think of consumer packaged goods. So you have your Beyond Meat. Okay, but what about all the supplies it took to get to Beyond Meat? So the pea protein instead of soy protein, instead of wheat protein, so all the different pulses that are possible, but also all the other things that it takes in the supply chain to get that package actually to you. So in cultivated meat, you have things like bioreactors. We'll talk about it in a minute, but this is the landscape, including the supply chain of all the companies now globally that are working on cultivated meats, which I believe has a very big future. I'm not good at highlighting. I tried to make a straight line here. Apologies for my wonky yellow highlighting. I'll give a plug to my alma mater, Northwestern University, but really what I want to point out here, again, from the Good Food Institute, the Burridge Lab at Northwestern University had this to say about its cultivated meat research. Our work published in January on reducing the cost of pluripotent stem cell media from more than $500 per liter to $10 a liter, talk about that in a second, gained as much interest from the cultivated meat field as from the stem cell field. So my point here is that the word is getting out. People see the monetary potential when you're shifting the entire food supply. Then you have enormous room for growth in this secular shift. So you see that interest is coming in his work really from the investors in the cultivated meat area as well. So very exciting. But here we talked about what are some of the blockades or bottlenecks that can happen in alternative protein. One of the bottlenecks for cultivated meat is that media, so what the cells nibble on to grow. I would have thought, oh gosh, isn't that going to be simple sugar, et cetera? But it's not. It's the building blocks of life: amino acids, hormones, et cetera, salt, saline, these things. It's very expensive. So that's a big area for investment, because whoever cracks that code for bringing down the price of that media is going to be a big winner in the investment landscape, because that's a big part of the equation, big piece of the puzzle we still need to figure out. So I'm going kind of quickly, but I think you're probably understanding by now that people are getting the memo. There's a lot of money to be made here. You're shifting everything. Today we're talking about alternative proteins, but you're going to have to shift your co-manufacturing plants and your protein sources. This means if you're growing different kind of proteins, you're going to see your farming and your agriculture shift. If your agriculture shifts, you need different kind of machinery to farm the land, et cetera. You can see there's lots of opportunities up and down the supply chain. We'll talk about that a little bit more as well. But so who's coming into this space? We see the opportunity in alternative protein. It's plant-based proteins, it's fermented proteins, it's cellular agriculture, cultivated agriculture. So who's in? Well, of course, the mission-aligned people who either for their health or for the environment or for animals, they would like to see this shift happen sooner rather than later. So mission-aligned incubators and accelerators, they see the mission, they see the vision, and they are very driven by that. But then, of course, there's the non-mission aligned folks who see the monetary potential. They are also in it as well. These incubators and accelerators, what they do is they give a little bit of seed money, usually to a company that isn't just an idea. They don't even have a prototype at this point. They give them a little seed money to hopefully get to a pilot stage of that prototype. And then they also take a chunk of that company, hoping that they do well. So there's usually some mentoring that goes on and some seed capital. Okay, then of course we have new and existing venture capital firms. So the mission-aligned venture capital firms, absolutely. And then all the non-aligned venture capital firms who are saying, oh, we can start a new fund just for alternative protein. We've heard the buzzword. We saw Beyond Meat on the public markets. We think this could be a good thing. They're getting in. And then here's the big increase. Of late, you're seeing corporate funds get in. By that, I mean Chipotle, PepsiCo, Tyson, Nestle, Danone, Cargill. So many of them getting in. Why is that? Well, investors got the memo. They know that this is going to be a lucrative area. More investors are coming in. They're pushing up the valuations of these companies that are creating plant-based proteins, fermented proteins, and cultivated meat, cultivated proteins. And so the valuations are getting very high. So it's actually getting harder to do a merger and acquisition when you're going to spend a lot of money and then have negative EBITDA on the books. So they're doing two things. They're getting in on the action by spending less and buying only part of it, investing in part of it. They also can take a wait and see. They're there as a strategic investor. So they're helping, they're learning, they're watching. Most likely those corporations are going to be coming out with their own product lines. That's what I would imagine. And I can't say that I lament on this. The corporations can bring not only the big dollars to this shifting food supply, which, remember, we have a shifting food supply because we have big problems on our hands. So it is solving big problems for all of us one way or another. If you're not mission aligned about animals, you probably do care about the future of the planet for your kids and your own health. So, we're all aligned and we all pretty much realize that the current food system is broken. So I don't lament that corporations are getting in. They're bringing their dollars, they're bringing their distribution channels, they're bringing their advertising budgets, and that's going to help with the bottom line consumer. Okay, so we talked again about plant-based proteins, fermented proteins, cultivated proteins, but there's lots of white spaces. So I think I have a slide here. Do I? Okay, lots of white spaces. So here, just getting a little bit ahead. Currently, the global plant-based meat market. I know I've thrown a lot of numbers at everyone today, but kind of wrap your mind around this. We're not talking about the global food market now. We're just talking about plant-based meats, a global standpoint. $4.2 billion valuation. Now, remember, in the beginning, we said the global meat market is 1.4 trillion. So right now, plant-based meats are about 3% of the market. So we got 97% to go. So sometimes people say to me, oh my gosh, another plant-based burger. Is the market filled? Is it too late to get in? It is not too late to get in. In speaking of plant-based meat alone, we've got 97% of the market left to go. So absolutely not too late to get in. In fact, to underscore that, there are still many, many white spaces where there's almost no one playing. So ingredients are going to be a big deal. You know, it's always nice to go for the fancy Oatleys and, you know, the sexy CPG, but they all need better proteins. There's no issue with soy in Asia, but in the US, it's a big problem. It has perception problems. So, you know, different proteins that ingredients and proteins that deliver on protein. That's one area. Also, we talked about this a little bit. So if you're going to change the way you farm, because you're changing what you farm, because you're changing what you eat, what you make with those farming materials, you know, those vegetables, then you need different machinery for farming. So, you know, there's lots of areas to invest up and down the supply chain. If you are, quickly jump ahead of myself again, if you are in cultivated meat, these are the things that happen before you actually get the end product. So you can invest in just the cell lines. So that's an issue for cultivated meat, finding stable cell lines that don't go kind of wonky, for lack of a scientific expression, wonky in the making, that remain stable. The media we talked about, what the cells nibble on, so expensive. Whoever cracks the code to that, I thank you in advance. Scaffolding, so giving the cells structure so that they can grow and get big. And then those bioreactors. So, lots of room in the biotech innovation space. Another bottleneck for plant-based products right now, so not the fermented and the cultivated meat, but the plant-based meats right now, is co-manufacturing plants. A lot of companies feel that they don't want to give their product to a co-manufacturer that does meat. They're afraid that either there's going to be some cross-contamination or that their IP and trade secrets are going to be out of the bottle. So they're trying to find co-manufacturing plants themselves, or they're building them themselves. So, you know, that takes your focus away from making your product, which you'd much rather do, you know, developing, marketing, et cetera, your products, rather than, you know, being the plant overseer, if you will, the factory plant overseer. So that's a bottleneck, and there's some investment dollars going in there. And then, sure, we have burgers. We're starting to get quite a bit of sausage. We don't have plant-based seafood, really, at any kind of scale that matters. You've got some startups, but we don't have plant-based fillets of fish that matter. We don't have bacon. We don't have whole cuts of meat. We do have some chicken nuggets, things like this, but we're looking for, you know, there's one plant-based company that's doing whole cuts of steak, but we still need whole cuts of pork. We need lamb. We need, lots of things. Bacon. We need a replacement for bacon. So lots of areas to invest in the event that you were thinking, oh my gosh, it might be too late. It is not too late. It is just the tip of the iceberg. So very exciting. Here's some of the companies. I mean, I could never get into all of them. There are so many companies now that are very exciting doing alternative proteins, but here's just some of what's going on. Some of the protein that's getting a lot of the buzz and a lot of the money. So we look at mushrooms, fungi, mycelium, mycoproteins. These are a big deal these days. I host the Plant-Based Business Hour, so I will say that Eben Bayer, who is the co-founder of At Last and also of Ecovative Design. Oh my gosh. He works with mushrooms, and truly, I do believe that mushrooms are the answer. There's so many versatile things that you can do with mushrooms. Of course, At Last is not the only company working with mushrooms. You have Fable Foods in Australia, Meaty also in the United States, algae, so much protein in algae. So a little bit interesting. What's old is new again. Algae was kind of big in the 70s, but it's making a comeback in a very non-70s way. So Triton Algae Innovation, back at the Arts Algae Sciences. There's many algae companies on the market, but algae is really a fun potential because Back of the Yards Algae Sciences, for example, has come across through their deep work and dedication an algae heme. So one of the things that people like so much about animal meat is actually the heme that's in the blood. So hematobin, so the heme, the taste that's in that animal blood. So not for me, but maybe for other people. So they have an algae heme that they're adding to products. So very interesting. Precision protein. We talked about Perfect Day, how wonderful that is. Get your hands on some Perfect Day. Yeah, you'll be an investor. Better Dairy, those vegan cowboys, New Culture. There's so many here. Remilk out of Israel. I don't want to leave anyone off, and I probably have. Super Brewed, for example, also out of the United States. And then biomass proteins, you probably did see, maybe you saw the 60-minute segment with Bill Gates talking to the Chicago founder of Nature's Find. They do biomass fermentation. So they grow large microbes at a time to get whole cuts of meat. They now have their first cream cheese on the market. Very exciting. You're going to see precision fermentation and biomass fermentation. We talked about this already, to the market much faster than cultivated meat. They don't have the scale up issues. So you're seeing them get a larger piece of the investment pie, as well as mushrooms and algae and just general plant-based meats. Now almost seeming like old school, kick it old school with plant-based meats because it's not cultivated or precision fermentation, but you're starting to see investments into those alternative plant-based meats like bacon. Gotta crack that code. But it is not just the private sector that's getting into the game. I probably don't need to tell you guys this. All of you probably saw the news when Beyond Meat hit an IPO. It did 158% growth in one day. That was the largest IPO since the stock market crash of 2008. And Oatly recently capturing all the headlines, creating $13 billion in a day. So a very exciting day. And for anyone who's interested, I do a lot with the public markets. Like, hopefully you are all writing down questions that you have for me. I do apologize that I can't be there with you today. But if you do have questions, particularly about the public markets, I work a lot in that area as well. So please reach out to me on LinkedIn or elizabeth@elizabethalfano.com. So lots of new opportunities coming on the public market as well. And then, of course, we still have the private market that we talked about. So why are we seeing such incredible growth? It's because we are looking at a shift of the entire global food supply system from the very top of the supply chain all the way down to the bottom. In fact, a fun conversation. And if this is exciting to you, like it is to me, again, just hit me up on LinkedIn because there's so much, we could go off on so many tangents here, really. But I actually predict that the banking system is going to shift because it all starts with, where do you get your funding? Yes, it's great to have private funding, but sometimes you need bridge loans to get you through this kind of debt financing. And the way the loans are structured now, the banks really need to see their return on investment, and they're not so concerned about a global carbon footprint, for example. And I think that's going to shift. I think they're going to start requiring certain numbers, not just in the return of capital, but also in global footprints for the environment, et cetera. So I think from the very, very beginning down to the very, very end, transportation, et cetera, you're going to see an entire shift. Just to hit home, and one more chart, because this is an investing presentation, so I can't throw enough graphs and numbers at you, but just in case you didn't get enough graphs and numbers in this presentation, here I'll show you this from A.T. Kearney. So what we're looking at here is the growth of the total global meat market. Now, what's interesting here is the way they define the global meat market is meat, plant-based meat, fermented proteins, and cultivated meat. That's new. Usually people would say the global meat market, and then there's this plant-based thing over here, this little nuisance. That is no longer the case. And if you look at the year 2040, which is the prediction that they're making for the meat market, you'll see that conventional meat takes up about 40%, and that novel vegan meat replacements, plant-based meat as well as fermented, and cultured meat, so that cellular meat, you see how big cellular meat has gotten. I think once that code is cracked for the media, it's really going to have a hockey stick-like growth. And we've been seeing in some of the charts already, in investment, we saw an earlier chart where you're just starting to look like that hockey stick that we all like to see. You're really going to see that take off for cultured meat. But here, anyways, novel vegan meat replacement and cultured meat makes 60% of the global meat market. So I ask you, if it's going to be 60% of the global meat market, then it's not really alt. It's actually the thing. It's the main thing. And that's really the point of what I want to say today, is that we are part of a secular trend akin to the digital revolution. Again, I do a lot of interviews on the Plant-Based Business Hour, and I interviewed the former co-CEO of Whole Foods, Walter Robb, and his prediction. So topping all the other numbers that I gave you, his prediction is that the global plant-based market is going to 500 billion before 2040. So very, very exciting. I hope I am not over my time. I hope I am not under my time. Here's a bunch of stuff on me. I won't bother you with this, but I will say, of course, subscribe to the Plant-Based Business Hour. Or if you have a plant-based company that you're working with, either as an investor or you perhaps are a founder and you're starting it yourself, of course, reach out to me at Plant Powered Consulting. Happy to help you with a lot of what I do, which is marketing, media strategy, and PR, but also just general business strategy and investors and investor relations. So for those of you who are founders, of course, reach out to me there. But for those of you who have questions about the public market, about private market, about dipping your toe in if you're brand new to investing, what that looks like, certainly I would say some resources for you. I highly recommend Moo's Law, written by Jim Mellon, Moo's Law, The Investor's Guide to the New Agrarian Revolution. I highly recommend that book. I highly recommend becoming a member at Glasswell Syndicate. Again, reach out to me for that contact information, or you can probably find them on LinkedIn. But I will introduce you immediately to Macy Marriott, a beautiful person. And that is a great way to learn about venture investing. First of all, if you're really dipping your toe into that degree, or just get a fantastic deal flow really easily. Glasswell Syndicate is wonderful. But I've got lots of resources for you. So if you have any questions, or if you enjoy this like I do and you want to talk about tangents, or you just want some information, reach out to me at any of these places. Okay, before let's see if I can do this, folks. Some technology, I don't know, some buttons. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Here we are. So I want to thank you for your time. And if there's any questions, reach out to me. And of course, thank you to the folks here at the Great Summit for inviting me. And thank you for everyone for even being interested in this topic. I believe decades from now, maybe not even, maybe in my lifetime, our grandkids, our kids, they'll say, can you believe they were eating meat like that? And you're going to be able to say, I played a part in making the shift happen. So I'm deeply grateful for all that you do, for your interest in this subject. Reach out to me at any time. I am here to answer questions. And thank you for all you do.